Shabbat Shalom. Since it is December 22nd today, I figured there's really only one holiday I can talk about tonight. You know which one I'm talking about, of course. Winter solstice. What'd you think I meant? In fact, last night was the winter solstice. December 21st was the one day of 2023 with the least amount of sunlight and the most darkness of the whole year. Every night leading up to last night grew longer and longer, the period of daylight shorter and shorter until winter solstice hit. And then the reverse process began. The period of daylight gradually growing longer, the period of darkness shorter. Winter solstice. Winter solstice might be the only universally and continually celebrated holiday, period, bar none. All religions, every culture, all people throughout time have marked the solstice. The Hindus call it Maghi. Christians co-opted the Germanic Yule celebration, decided that's when Jesus was born, which is very clever of them. In East Asia, it's called Dongji. And the Iranians called it Yalda. Everyone, really, everyone marks the winter solstice. But what about the Jews? I'm glad you asked. Somebody is asking, I'm sure. There's a very funny story in Tractate Avodah Zarah in the Talmud, written by our ancient rabbis 2,000 years ago. They start off by saying, well, we don't celebrate those holidays. Elu edehen shel ovdei kochavim. These are the festivals of the star worshippers. And they say, which ones? Calendar and Saturnalia. And that sparks a discussion. That's a very Talmudic thing where somebody mentions something and someone goes, that reminds me. Ooh, that reminds me. Ooh, that reminds me. It's a very Jewish book. So one rabbi asked, well, when are these festivals celebrated? And the other rabbis answer him, well, Calendar is the 8 days after the winter solstice, and Saturnalia is the 8 days before it. And that, of course, reminds the rabbis of another story. Another story that I think points to the universality and at the same time, the very Jewishness of a date such as this one. They tell the story. Lefi shira Adam harishon yom shemi ma'at. When the very first man, Adam harishon, Adam, saw that the day was progressively diminishing, he said, Oy li, woe is me. Perhaps because I sinned, the world is becoming dark around me and will ultimately return to tohu vavohu, chaos and disorder. This is the death that was sentenced upon me from heaven. You have to cut the guy a little slack, okay? He'd been alive for like less than a week, you know? So all he knew was that the daylight, the time of sun and sight and warmth and safety, was shrinking. And the time of dark and cold and fear and chaos was growing. And so, the rabbis teach, he fairly reasonably assumes that the world is now being uncreated, descending back into tohu vavohu, the chaos and despair that was all that existed before God spoke the universe into being and gave it order. Bereshit bara Elohim, you know, in the beginning God created that stuff. Adam truly thinks it is the end for him, and so he spends these 8 days of diminishing light in fasting and prayer. So what ends up happening? Is the world unmade? Of course not. When he saw that the season of Tevet, that's the Hebrew month we're in right now, the season that also falls during winter solstice, and he saw that the days were progressively lengthening, he said, Min chago shel olam. This is the order of the world. And then the Talmud tells us every year to mark the winter solstice, he would celebrate for 8 days, 8 days of prayers and celebration and festivities, which sounds an awful lot like a holiday we celebrate during this time of year for 8 days. We might overlay our holidays a little bit too. The funny thing is that the rabbis are very quick to say that yes, of course, we do mark the winter solstice, thusly it's those pesky Roman pagans, they stole the idea from us. Well, it was us Jews who did it first. I already gave a Hanukkah sermon, this is not the point. What strikes me about this very funny story that the rabbis have about Adam, the first man, and his experience with the diminishing light and the growing darkness, is that it really underlines the universality and the very Jewishness at the same time that is inherent in winter solstice. Because it's Adam Harishon, right? It's the first man So really representing all people, everybody, have this fear of the dark. Not a fear of the literal dark, because it's still true now in an age when we can see at night, we have electricity. It is very human to have an anxiety about darkness, about chaos and disorder and confusion, and in fact, growing darkness. A world that seems to be descending into chaos, a darkness that seems to be growing and growing unabated, swallowing all the light until it seems that one day darkness is all that there will be. I don't think it's a stretch to say that that's how it feels these days. But what Judaism teaches is that yes, the darkness is so very dark. And it is normal, it's natural to fear, like Adam, the first man, did. It is natural to fear that the darkness will consume the world, become a black hole of despair, tohu vavohu. Have you felt that way in the past darkening months? I'm asking you for real, like, have you felt that way at all? Yeah, I don't think I've talked to any Jewish person who has not felt that way at some point. So it's okay for you to admit feeling that. It's human. It's eternal. This Talmudic story is over 2,000 years old. But in the story, and in real life, actual life, does the darkness cease? Do the days eventually become more and more light, have more happiness than sadness, more joy than pain? Yes. Somebody was brave enough to say it. Winter solstice always, eventually arrives. The days do become lighter. The darkness is not eternal. Though we may fear it is not. It is literally impossible for it to be so. The world cannot be unmade. You can get into a dark place about it sometimes, like Adam HaRishon and me. That's normal. One might even argue it's healthy. But you always have to remember that it is not forever. And there is something you can do, other than hand-wringing and doom-scrolling. Look to Adam HaRishon from the Talmud. What does he do? He turns towards his religion, his identity, who he is. He prays, he celebrates, which means he's seeking out community, others to be around to warm his soul in the admittedly dark time that he finds himself. That is it's how we will get through the tough times that always cycle upon us in history. It's how we Jews have managed to survive thousands and thousands of years. We have done it before, and we are doing it again because we are a people of light and love. And because of that, we will never be bereft. I wish all of us, days of ever-increasing light, a happy winter solstice, and a Shabbat Shalom.